Have any of you ever worked in a place where you didn't trust your coworkers? If you're sitting next to them, don't raise your hand. Have you ever worked in a place where you didn't trust the motivation or the agenda of your management? Is that a great place to work? No, not at all. In fact, if we don't have trust, whether it's in our business life, whether it's with our friends, whether it's with our spouse, if we don't have trust, we don't have a lot of anything. And in the business world, when we don't have trust, everything gets undermined because everything of value that we have in this world is built on trust. I was talking to somebody earlier and they said, you know, our society doesn't work if we don't trust. If I'm a vendor and you give me a credit card, I trust that the credit card company is going to pay me later for that transaction. If we didn't trust that, we would only take cash. We wouldn't be able to go forward. There's so many examples of everything having this foundation of trust. And yet, as I said in the pitch, I had a misunderstanding of what trust was. Has anybody ever seen me speak before? Wow, a lot of people. Oh, that's frightening. So I spoke for 15 years as a professional speaker, talking about how do you build relationships in business. And one of the lines I would use, it's a little bit of a cliche, is people do business with who? People they know, they like, and they trust. But what I found out after I got involved with the Trust Edge Leadership Institute was that what I was teaching people for 10 years and doing a good job of it, is I was teaching them how to get known and liked. My assumption was that trust just came along, or it didn't, because of the actions that people took. I thought really trust was all based around character. And as it turned out, your character is part of the reason that people trust you. The actions that you take is part of the reason that people trust you, but it's not the only reason. So I got certified with this organization, and it's based on 20 years of graduate level research by a gentleman named David Horsager. He did his graduate work, and he did this whole thesis on trust. And for 20 years, he has redone all of the surveys. He has surveyed companies. He has surveyed governments. He works with governments in South America, governments in Africa, to really work on how do we build trust, because when there's trust in a society, it goes a long way. But most of his work has been over 5,000 companies where he's dived in to how is the trust within the company between coworkers and between their managers, and how is the trust they have with whoever their constituency is. And when trust is higher, the companies do better, people stay longer, they're more enjoying their jobs, people buy more from them. When the inverse is true, it's not a great place to work, and customers don't stick around. So I'm going to show you this video really quick because all of you have been in this. Well, it didn't happen. Let's see. It didn't translate to this. So let's see if we can have a little bit of help. Big round of applause for our president. Sometimes when you email something, the video doesn't come along, so that's okay. All right, we're going to go along without the video. Just be aware of this. Trust me. It's a freaking awesome video. I'll tell you what it is. It's got these two kids, and the older sister had learned at school how to do a trust fall. Do you all know what a trust fall is? It's where you stand there and you fall backwards and someone catches you. She so badly wanted to teach her little brother. So the dad came in and he explained it to the brother, and he stood there and he was nervous as could be. The sister was behind him all ready to catch him, and the dad says, 1, 2, 3, and the kid literally falls forward and hits his face on the carpet. That sucks. So, but what is trust? Anybody have an idea? It's a belief. You've seen this before. Wow, the builds aren't happening. It's a confident belief in a person, product, or organization. And so whether you're an individual, whether you work for a company, or whether you are a product manager, you want people to trust the product that you have. So David builds this case for trust, and he has spent 20 years speaking to the largest corporations and governments around the world. And during the pandemic, he opened up all of his IP to people like me who could go and teach other people who could go and teach other people this basis of this. And I asked him, because I was one of the first people to get certified in his program. There's now about 200 people. I asked him, I said, why would you give your IP away? Because he doesn't charge a lot for me to be certified, and I don't have to pay him when I go out and do this stuff. And there's an assessment that we give companies when we go in and do the 3-hour workshop, where everyone takes the assessment, and then the assessment shows how the team scores on the 8 pillars of trust. And it doesn't cost me very much to give this to a company. I said, David, why are you doing this? And he said, you know, I believe so much in my research. I can only speak to so many people, and his fees are really high. And he goes, if I have other people who can go out and take this message to the world, more people can learn this and can succeed in their companies and their career. Because a lack of trust is the biggest expense that your company has. If you care about the product that you manage, if you care about the company that you work for, and you don't feel where you work now is a high trust environment, that is how products and companies fail. And it's also a surefire thing if you manage a team as to why people will lose that team. So all of David's research for 20 years shows that inside a company, when trust goes up, and what they do is they do this assessment with people, and they teach the company how to build trust. And then they come back a year or 2 years later and they give everybody the same assessment again. When trust levels have risen, output goes up, morale is higher, retention is higher. Retention's been one of the biggest topics that we've had the last 3 years. If people trust the company, if they trust their managers, if they trust their coworkers, they stay longer, they work harder, and they're more satisfied in their jobs. Their productivity goes through the roof. Innovation, which is so important to all of you in the jobs that you have, innovation of the team becomes higher, and loyalty to the company goes up, and in the end, revenue goes up, and we all want the revenue goes up because that's how we all get paid. So that's a great thing for a company when they can raise that trust. However, that opposite is true. And many of you raised your hand. In fact, over half of you raised your hand when I said, have you ever worked in a place where the trust level with your management or your coworkers wasn't high? Costs go up, problems go up, suspicion rises. Think about this. If you're suspicious of one of your coworkers that maybe they're trying to take credit for your work, or maybe they're undermining you, or they're doing something that's not helping the greater good, if you're suspicious of them, it makes every day suck in that job. Attrition goes through the roof, time to market goes up, and stress goes up. Stress is the #1 problem that's being discovered in our society right now. Coming out of the pandemic, people are finding that if they're stressed at work, everything in their life is going haywire. One of my friends is a professional speaker. She has done a research study the last 3 years of over 5,000 people. And when she started this, it was all about work-life balance. Because when she started this pre-pandemic, when she started this research, everybody was talking about how important work-life balance was. And she speaks to women's groups, and she speaks to companies that are dominated and run by women, and everybody was talking to her about work-life balance, work-life balance, work-life balance. So that was the premise of the survey that she did. She surveyed 5,000 people all over North America, and what she discovered is, do you know how many people care about work-life balance when they're asked about everything in their job? Almost none. Work-life balance scored very low. It's a great buzzword, and we all talked about it, but most intelligent people realize they're never going to be in balance. Because if you've got kids and that kid is sick and you've got to get them to the doctor, are you going to be in balance with work that day? No. And if you're under a deadline to get the product out, everything's going really well, and you have someone who can help you with the kids, and you've got 2 weeks to get this whole thing launched, is your home life going to be in balance that 2 weeks? No. So people aren't in balance, and they know that. People understand that things are going to be out of balance, depend on what's going on in their calendar. But what people cared about was stress. If they could have less stress, they would like their jobs better, they'd stay longer, and they'd be more satisfied. So she has come out of this research as now one of the leading experts on stress. NASA hires her to talk to engineers about how to manage stress. Because here's the thing. If you're stressed at work and you're making, I don't know what kind of a product, the odds are, if you don't do a good job, nobody dies. At NASA, if they are stressed and they miss something, people die. And so she is now training NASA engineers. She says the #1 problem is stress. And as I got into this work on trust, I realized the two are very well connected. Because if you're in a job where you don't trust the situation, how well do you sleep at night? Not really well. And what happens is if you're not sleeping well, you're not going to do a good job the next day. It's a never-ending spiral where trust can cause everything to go down. So David's work shows the number one reason that people want to work for an organization, when he really delves it all down, is they trust the leadership. If you trust the leadership and you trust the mission of the company, you are going to be more satisfied in your job. Secondly, a meaningful number of people of every single generation said they would actually take a pay cut for the good of the organization if they trust their leadership. And we saw a lot of that during the pandemic when there was downsizing and things like that. Many people I know worked for companies where they were going to have to do layoffs or they were going to have to do something. People on the team were willing to take a 15% payoff while we were in lockdown until we figured out how we could do it. Other people, if they didn't trust the management, they weren't going to be happy with that type of situation. So the number one question everybody you work with is asking about you is, can I trust you? Now, you don't go to work thinking, hey, there's 30 people here on my floor. They're all wondering if they can trust me, but they are. And think about it. You're doing the same thing. You're looking around trying to decide, if you're on a team, can I trust these people? Because you want to do a good job. You want to succeed. You want the company to succeed. And if you don't trust the people who are around you, and especially if you don't trust management, things aren't going to go well. It takes a long time to grow a tree. Think of a giant sequoia, a giant redwood. Those take 300 years to grow. And yet, a single light of a match can do what? It can destroy the whole thing really fast. Now, one person did tell me recently that actually giant redwoods don't burn. They're actually in their DNA. They actually are fire resistant. But it's an analogy. It can take 300 years to grow a massive tree. And it can take just a few minutes for that all to burn down. And this is something we have to think about. The trust that we build with our coworkers can be undermined if we do something to undercut somebody. So we have to be thinking of two things, not just how can I trust them? What are their actions? What are their results? But how can they trust me? And what is happening on the things that I do? So what are the things that destroy trust? Go ahead and shout it out. Inconsistency. Absolutely. Something else. I'm sorry? Passive aggressiveness. Now you're talking my language. That's actually my language. No, I'm just kidding. Gaslighting. Absolutely. Something else that can destroy trust in the workplace. Dishonesty, without question. Anything else? Oh, God. Gossip and talking behind your back, undermining, things like that. There was somebody over here. What was yours? Changing expectations. Have you ever worked anywhere where the expectations change? You show up, you think you got it mailed, and they come in and say, hey, we're not selling that product anymore. Now we're doing this. If it happens once, you're okay. If it happens every 6 months, you're like, what the heck? I have a young friend who just left a company. They hired him to do a job. 6 months after he got there, they eliminated it and put him in charge of an entire other division that he had no experience in. 6 months into it, he started to get a little bit of oomph, if you will, in that job. And they pulled the plug on that project. He quit the company because he's like, I can't just keep being assigned to things I don't know anything about. So the trust edge, which is what David calls his work, is a competitive advantage gained when others confidently believe in you. So here's the thing about trust. If you're trying to build your career in the company you're in or somewhere else you want to go, maybe you want to start your own company. Trust is your secret weapon. If people trust you, they're going to bring opportunities to you. And the more opportunities you get inside the company and you do a good job, what's going to happen is things are going to go your way. So does your team have uncommon trust? And I call it uncommon trust because most of us go into a situation kind of trusting people. And if they show us something that doesn't work, we don't trust them. But uncommon trust is when you've built up enough trust capital to where when something does go wrong, when you do something that may undermine that trust, they're willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. Uncommon trust is, I believe in you enough that when things aren't going my way this time, I know what your character is. I know what the actions you are, so we can get past sort of those problems. So David's research, like I said, I thought this was all based around character. David's research found there's 8 areas of trust, and they all matter, and they all matter somewhat equally. Character is one of those pillars, but there are a lot of things, and we're just going to touch on a couple of them because I just have a little bit of time. But number one is clarity. People trust what is clear, and they distrust the ambiguous. But his research also shows that people distrust overcomplicated. So if you're really vague when you give an assignment to your team, they don't trust you because they don't know how they're going to be measured. They don't know what the outcome is. But if you over-explain it, now you're a micromanager. Who loves a good micromanager? Woo! Nobody. The second one is compassion. People trust people who they know care. If people on your team care about the product that you're working on, they care about meeting deadlines, you're going to trust them more than people who are really nonchalant. And we went through this whole couple of years where they were talking about quiet quitting. Those people didn't care. There were people who were working remotely who they didn't have any friends there. They were totally remotely. In fact, I talked to HR managers. Several tech companies told me that they actually discovered employees who had 2 full-time jobs. And they didn't care which one would find out and fire them first because they were pulling down $200,000 salaries, working about half the time. But that's because they were fully remote, they were jaded about management of big companies, and they didn't have any connection to other people. When you work with people and you care about them, you don't cheat them, typically. The next one on there is character, and we talked about character. You know, if you are a person of bad character, if you're known for cheating, for stealing, that's going to undermine it. Years ago, my wife used to work for Hyatt Hotels. Someone who I knew worked for the same company, and we ended up at an event together, and everybody was staying at the Marriott, but we were staying at the Hyatt. Do you know why? Free lodging. We showed up at the event, and the other person who I knew shows up and is wearing a pretty cool tie. And I said, that's a very cool tie. He goes, I forgot to bring a tie. He goes, I went down to the gift shop. They wanted $100 for the tie. So I just took it. That person is not a friend of mine anymore. He's kind of out of our life. My wife was appalled because he worked for the same company, different hotel, but he worked for the same company. He just stole from the gift shop. That was character. She's shaking her head in absolute disbelief. You have been to events where someone is wearing a stolen tie. You just don't know. Their character sucks, but they're smart enough not to tell you. The next one is competency. Trust people who are good at their job. Think of your own team. The people you know are experienced and great, you trust them when you give them that next thing. People trust a commitment. When they know that you're going to stay late on Friday night to help get this done, they trust you because they know you're committed. People trust people who are very committed to what's going on. And then the next one is connection. Now, those of you who've seen me speak before, you know that I talk about the human side of business, why it's important to show up at events. In fact, we had a discussion before today started that Product Camp 15 years ago, 12 years ago, 10 years ago, 300 people, 6 simultaneous breakouts. But after the pandemic, a lot of people feel like, I don't have to, there's no reason to network. A lot of people don't connect with other people. Some people are more introverted and they feel like they got a free pass because they're like, I can do everything by Zoom. Yay! How many people feel you can build as good of a relationship on Zoom as you can by sharing an experience in person? And that's okay. No, put your hand up high, Annette. There are exceptions to the rule. There are outliers. I talk to people all the time after I talk about this in my networking talk. They're like, you don't understand. I started my business with somebody in the Ukraine. We've never been even in the same country, and we're making millions of dollars. We've started this whole thing, and we're best friends. Absolutely. It's called an outlier. And you know what the problem we have in America is? We champion the outliers. We champion the people who write something on a napkin and become a billionaire 9 days later, and we're like, yes, that's a fluke. Connection between people is really important. I've been teaching this for 15 years. It's super important. In fact, the number one way people find jobs when they're out of work is through what? Their network. And so it's important to show up and connect. The whole reason I got involved with the Trust Edge Leadership Institute is I knew David for a long time. We both spoke at the same conference. He was paid a lot more money than I was. And at the end of that was a joke. At the end of my speech, by the way, if you have to explain the joke, it's not funny. Afterwards, David came up and he said, everything you talked about aligns with this pillar. Connection is so important. And he wanted to interview me to talk about the connection pillar. And the more I got into seeing how everything worked, I realized that connection is only one part of this whole thing that gives you that secret weapon, that there's so many other pieces to it. The 7th one is contribution. People trust people who get results. Now, here's a little thing. You're noticing this because we're 7 of 8 in, and you're thinking they all start with C. I've seen those professional speakers who make up the 4 P's of this, or the 9 D's of that, or the 8 C's of trust. Actually, all these words did not start with C when David did his initial research. He came up with the 8 pillars, but several of them were like, this one was results. People trust people who have results. But he's a great marketer. He also realized that if you were going to have 8 pillars, figure out how to make them all like interesting. Because if that just said results, then you'd be like, why is one not start with a C? And you'd totally not listen to anything else that I said the rest of the time. But people trust the people who get results. And then finally, it's consistency. Somebody said that when I was talking about what undermines success, and people were saying that we don't trust it if they change horses in the stream far too often. If leaders aren't consistent, if your coworkers aren't consistent, you can't trust them. Have you ever gone to work and you're like, oh God, I don't know what Becky we're going to get today? Some days Becky is sweet and supportive, and some days she is on fire. Is there someone named Becky sitting here? They all left. Oh, it's the same lady who made that face earlier, like, what? Sorry, she didn't even have a name tag on. I just chose that out of the air. So I'm only going to have time to talk about 2 of these. So let's talk a little bit about clarity. People trust what is clear, and they distrust what is ambiguous or overly complicated. So how many people have ever had a manager who's been very vague? Are you confident, here in the front, Eugenia, are you confident when you present work back to that manager if they were extremely vague, if you've done a good job? No, because you don't know what to expect. So it is really important that you realize that on your team, clarity is very important. And this comes down to communication. Teams need to be taught how to communicate with each other because we have all different styles in our team. Some people are introverts, some people are extroverts. You can break those down into a lot of other areas. And what happens when you're around somebody who's totally polar opposite from you in their communication style? If I get around like a total introvert, I think they freak out because I'm kind of a big personality. So my daughter got married in June. She married her freshman boyfriend from college. When she got to college, like, I don't know, 2015, she met this boy and everything was all about this boy. And I'm like, you're not going to marry your freshman boyfriend. We now have Thomas in our family. And Thomas is awesome. Thomas is also one of the smartest mathematicians of his generation. He went to Carnegie Mellon on a full ride scholarship. He won a thing called the Putnam competition. Does anybody know what that is? It's like the NCAA championship of mathematics. He won. He also in college went to the International Math Olympics. I didn't know that was a thing. When I was in high school, I was drinking beer behind the bleachers. Some people do math. He went every country in the world sends 6 high school seniors to the International Math Olympics. Thomas went twice. He went as a junior and a senior. So Thomas, if you think smartest mathematician, what do you think personality-wise? He's going to be quiet, interested, sweetest boy in the world. You couldn't ask for a nicer man to marry your daughter, but he's a little bit quiet. The first time he met me, I think he thought, I got to dump this girl. Because I was just too big of a personality, and the way we communicated was different. We now have a great friendship. But clarity in understanding the other person so that you can communicate with them in their way really matters. Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, says if you have more than 3 priorities on your project in your company, you don't have any. Because if you have too many priorities, they all get lost. So you got to remember that clarity is keeping it simple and making sure you're communicating with people in ways they understand. And the number one action that increases tenure is open, honest communication in the workplace. If there's a problem in the company, people want to know there's a problem in the company. Now, you don't want to be, oh, the sky is falling, Chicken Little, but people want to know what's going on. Clarity unifies and motivates the team. So clarity is extremely important. Second pillar I want to talk about is connection, because this is my background. People want to follow and buy from and be around people they know, they like, and they trust. People want to feel that they have a connection to you. And some of that can be shared experiences. Maybe people you meet at product camp, you grab a box lunch, you go and sit with somebody you don't know, you have a great conversation. The next time you see them, you feel you know them a little bit better. So there's that. The other thing is people want to feel a connection of a shared experience. So in a room of all product managers, you already have a connection. So that's really important. The number one action that you can take to build trust with a new hire is to meet with them one-on-one. They've actually done surveys that how someone's first week of work goes and how connected they feel to the company, the more apt they are to enjoy the job and stay longer. I know a young woman who took a job during the pandemic, fully remote. She got promoted twice during her 2.5 years. She was managing the whole department. And one day she decided she was going to leave. She didn't even have another job lined up, and she quit. And I asked her a week later, I said, what's it like having walked away? And she goes, I didn't really have any connections to anybody because it was a fully remote job. She didn't really know anybody. She didn't have any connection to anybody. She liked her boss. He promoted her. She'd gotten more money. It was a fine experience, but she didn't feel connected to anyone in the company. Is that happening in the organization you work at? Do people feel they have no connection? Because if people do not feel connected to their coworkers, that's how they can become the quiet quitters. But it's also the way that people will just leave. If something else comes along and they don't care, they move on. Now, we live in a world of remote, in-person, or hybrid work. So this connection can be harder if it's remote or it's hybrid, because when everybody had to come in 5 days a week, what did you do between like 11:30 and 1? You went to lunch with coworkers, maybe in the room, maybe you got in the car and you drove to Taco Deli, whatever it was, you shared experiences with people. When you went to the bathroom, your best friend at work, you'd walk by them, what would you do? You'd pop into their cubicle and you'd tell them something, about what was going on. People at the end of the day would be like, oh, my husband or wife is picking up the kids, let's go to happy hour. Woo! People would go to happy hour. If people don't feel a connection, they're not going to be as connected to the company. And people want to feel you care. It's the old Maya Angelou quote that people forget what you said, they're going to forget what you did, but they're never going to forget how you make them feel. So even if you're remote, are you remembering that this interaction leaves a feeling with this other person? Are you interested in who they are? Are you connected to who they are? Because that really, really matters. So one of the ways you build connections, you tell stories. Now, some people, especially if they're more introverted, they say, I'm not a storyteller. What are you talking about? Story is just what happened when you went to lunch. What'd you do this weekend? If you tell a story about something you did this weekend, other people can relate to it because maybe they've been to the water park or maybe they've been to the zoo. Also, when you work with people, collaboration is a great way to build connection. Being transparent and vulnerable with people matters a lot. I come from a generation where if you were struggling, mental health-wise or other, you didn't share that with people. If you were going to a therapist, you didn't bring that up at happy hour with other people. Our generation was told, suck it up, buttercup. My younger friends will just tell you, oh, my therapist told me this, or oh, I can't go out that day because I have a Zoom call with my therapist. They all talk about it, which I think is a good thing because they're being transparent. It helps other people realize that we all have our own struggles, and that's how, we feel connected. And then the last thing is ask questions of people. When you ask a question of somebody and you're really interested in the answer, whether it's a personal question or it's about how do you do work, that's how people feel connected. Doing things builds more trust than just saying things. So there's a lot of bosses who talk about, yay for our culture. Have you ever worked in a company where all they talked about how great their culture was and it sucked? You don't trust that organization when that happens. So every interaction you have with another person is either going to increase your trust with them or it's going to decrease your trust with them. And if we think about this, as we go through our interactions with other humans, other carbon-based life forms, we're going to be able to build more trust because we're going to be thoughtful of what is this interaction doing. So as we wrap this up, these are the 8 pillars of trust. The assessment that we do shows where companies and individuals turn up low, and then people can learn to get better in that area. So if you struggle with clarity, if you're thinking, oh, he talked about clarity, I suck at giving good directions to my people. You can work on how do you communicate better? How do you do that? If connections is your problem, because you just would rather be at home on Zoom the whole day, you really didn't want to come to product camp at all, that is something that you can improve. So you need to figure out, where are my strengths? Where are my weaknesses on the 8 pillars? Play to your strengths and improve your weaknesses every single day and get your whole team to do the same thing. Money is not the currency of business and life. Trust is the currency of business and life because everything that we value is built on trust. It's been a lot of fun. I think I have 1 minute, so that's going to give one person a chance to ask a question. Becky? Yes. Absolutely. How to build trust when you work remotely. It's harder. You have to work more to build that trust remotely. You have to take that interest in people. You have to make sure you're communicating better with them. And realistically, see if I can go backwards back to the list. Maybe. There it is. You know, whether you're with somebody in person or you're remotely, every one of these pillars matters if you want to build trust. Are you compassionate about life, people, them, the job you're doing? You know, is your character, the way you treat them, really strong? Do you show them that you're competent? Because they're going to trust you if you get the job done and you've got their back. Are you committed to helping them do the best they can in their job? Do you have a connection with them? Do you have something in common? Can you share an experience with them? Are you a contributor? You know, if you're a taker and not a giver, if you're not getting results, people aren't going to trust you. And then you have to do all of these things consistently. If you think, Thom was a great speaker, I'm going to work on these 8 pillars, and a week from Friday, you're just treating people like shit, it's not going to work. It has to be a lifestyle. Thank you.